Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Cleveland Heights City Council Planning and Development Committee meeting to order. My name is Jessica Cohen and I chair this committee. I'm pleased to have with me the vice chair of the committee, Councilman Craig Cobb, and our member of the committee, Council President Tony Kuda. I'm also pleased to have with us all of our remaining council colleagues, Councilman Posh, Councilor DeWitt-Foy, Council Vice President Larson, and Councilor Stone. Thank you, Mayor Petras, for joining us. And of course, we have most of the planning and department staff with us, which is appropriate. So thank you. Just a quick note, we are bringing in some more chairs. Quick note on how tonight's going to run. We're going to get right into it in a minute with a presentation from staff. Council had an initial presentation a few months ago at a previous planning and development committee meeting. So this council in this administration got up to speed, but planning staff will certainly give more history of the work that's been done so far. That'll take about 25 to 30 minutes. Then we're gonna open it up to public comment. I'm gonna run this like I used to run the planning commission, except we have these papers. So I'll just call your name. We're gonna do 3 minutes. Please try to keep within the time. If you have less, that's great. If you have a little bit more, we'll probably let you go, but let's not abuse the privilege. And then if you have questions, please make sure to share them during that period. And what we're hoping to do is, as we did on the Planning Commission, staff will take all of those questions as you're speaking, and then we're gonna come back and while we're in this meeting of the committee, we'll have staff answer as many questions as they feel that they can. And then we'll officially adjourn the committee, and staff has committed to stay a little bit longer if you have individual questions or want to talk to them separately. And I'll speak for myself. I'll be able to stay a little bit longer after. We'd like to end around 7 for the committee meeting, formal committee meeting. Okay, with no further ado, I'll pass it over to Director Zanft.
Well, thanks, Chair, and thank you, everyone, for showing up. It's great to see some very new faces in the room, and I think that's because of this exciting topic that we want to talk about tonight. You'll notice that we've set up, actually like we have at the Planning Commission, where we're not just directly facing council, but we want to be able to see you all, because tonight is about information. We want to share information and hear information or hear thoughts from you. Next slide. So we wanted to start out with something a little bit fun, you probably know the answer, and looking around the room, you may know the answer certainly based on the Fonz, but what do each of these characters have in common? Fonzie from Happy Days, Joey from Full House, Carlton from The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, and Rory and Lorelai from Gilmore Girls. You could tell I haven't seen that show. So. They're fictitious, but they also are folks that lived in ADUs in their TV shows. So what's an ADU? We keep on saying that. It's an accessory dwelling unit, underline the accessory part of it. They can be detached, attached, or internal. And you've heard this term, or you've seen this typology before, but with a different term. Mother-in-law suites, granny flats, carriage houses, garage apartments. These are all different forms of ADUs. We have an interesting thing that's happened in the United States, which is its 100th year recently passing, which is this thing called zoning. It's an experiment that basically came out of the United States and came out of New York City because of those sort of rapid industrialization and all of the overcrowding, if you think about how the other half lives and those landmark things around the turn of the century. So there was a lot of concern about separating people, making sure that they were in safe spaces with a lot of light, and that led to zoning. Zoning started with height and setback controls, but then really expanded to land uses and basically everything else under the sun. So when you look at a zoning code from today in Cleveland Heights, in Detroit, in Albuquerque, in New York City, it's really based upon that 1916 New York City zoning code. But that's not how we've lived for the rest of history. And so what an accessory dwelling unit and what we're trying to explore here is, let's get back to the ways that we always lived, which is having that person, whether they were related to you or not, living in your backyard, upstairs, above the garage. And in fact, in Cleveland Heights, we have this very example, which are our historic carriage houses, which were first banned in our first code back in 1921, but they exist today. And you all have probably seen one of these at some point in your time here. 4 of them are actually one of our landmarks, and I think they're one of the really unique typologies that we have in this community. So one of the questions that we're going to ask now, and we're going to ask in our zoning update, which is a bigger project later this year, next year, is, shouldn't these things be allowed again? The things that made Cleveland Heights great to begin with, can we allow those again in the future? Just to briefly talk about some of the benefits of ADUs, it allows for aging in place. So folks that live in this community but age out of their larger homes, they don't want to leave the community, they don't want to leave their social networks, and they don't want to have to go into an assisted living facility, for example. They can stay in the community and stay with their friends. There's community benefits, there's housing for friends and relatives, and there are sustainable and environmental benefits on this, because it is that sort of gentle density that allows for more density, more housing opportunities, but doesn't do it in a way that impacts the environment. And we're not the only ones thinking about this. While it began on the West Coast in the 2010s, really, I've said this before, I'll say it again, the AARP took this up, and they have a lot of really great documents on that. And when the AARP takes up something, you know that it's been well thought out, that it's not a crazy idea, because obviously that's an organization that's going to be very serious about what they do. And so in Ohio, there's a number of communities that have adopted ordinances or allow ADUs. Cincinnati is the primary example, Lakewood and Columbus, but I do want to highlight our neighbor in South Euclid, who just in April adopted an ordinance or 2 ordinances related to ADUs, and they started in September of last year. And you can see in the screenshot on the screen, they started in September, they amended it or they sent it to the Planning Commission, and the Planning Commission amended it in January. They had a second reading, they had a public hearing, and a third reading, and they did all that in the span of 4 months. So it can be done, and we should give props to our neighbors in South Euclid. They are really leading the charge when it comes to housing, and they're making it easy for infill housing and ADUs to occur. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Brooke, and we want to share with you a lot of the hard work that's been happening for the past 2.5 years, really, on this. And then we're going to get into the details of the ordinance to give you all the right information, talk about some of the challenges and some of the concerns and how we think the proposal addresses those, and then allow the public to get up and share their thoughts on that. So with that, I will turn it to Brooke.
Okay, so I'll go over how we got to this point. In 2024, planning staff worked alongside the Cuyahoga County planning team to complete the ADU study. And the goal for that study was to explore if ADUs could provide benefits and be a good fit for our community. And the county also presented this to the Planning Commission in October of 2024 to gather feedback pretty early on. And at the end of 2024, we held an ADU design competition. It was here at City Hall. And we explored the design ideas that residents, as well as a local design community, have about what ADUs could look like in Cleveland Heights. In July of 2025, we compiled all the feedback we had gotten to create a draft of the zoning changes and had the third-party firm, Kronberg Urbanists and Architects, review it and provide suggestions for revisions. Following those revisions, we released that draft to the public in August of 2025 to gather input from the community to see what adjustments residents think we should make. And we also held several community engagement events in 2025 to discuss the future of ADUs in the city. And in March of this year, we released a second draft of the zoning changes, as well as our community engagement report that summarized the outcomes and findings of our events. And the survey was the most direct way that we received feedback from residents on the drafted ADU legislation. And we had a really good response rate with 645 total respondents. Xavier and I also held 9 pop-up tabling sessions throughout Cleveland Heights, different parts of the city, where we encouraged more people to take the survey to broaden its reach and to educate people about what ADUs are. And in recognizing the need for education, we also created 3 educational videos for social media where Xavier explained what ADUs are. He brought viewers to a local carriage house and visited a structure in University Heights, similar to what a newly constructed ADU would look like in Cleveland Heights. And these 3 videos got a combined 27,000 views between both Facebook and Instagram. So all of these engagement activities were extremely helpful to gather input we needed to tailor the drafted legislation to our community's needs and comfort levels.
Thank you, Brooke. I'm just going to walk us through the proposed current draft of the zoning to allow ADUs in Cleveland Heights. So I'll speak to this one. The proposal, the draft that we have right now is going to modify mainly 4 sections. This 110303B, which is our definitions, 1121.12C to D, which is our lot coverage rules, 1121.12G, which is our height for accessory buildings and structures, the code section on carriage houses, and then it's going to create this new section all about ADUs, which is 1121.13. That's going to be the majority of what I'll review with you. So first, these are the areas where ADUs will be allowed in the current draft. That's in the AA, in the A single family districts, and the B2 family districts. So if you look at that map on the right there, that's going to be those yellow and very pale yellow, and then also, I don't know, mustard is the B2 family. You'll only be allowed to have 1 ADU per lot. The types of ADUs that we're proposing to allow would be attached or detached designs. So you couldn't do something like a basement conversion, which we would consider a different type of ADU. You couldn't convert an attic space to create a separate dwelling unit. That would be a type of ADU that would not be allowed. Only the detached style or something attached to the home. The ADU would be allowed in the rear and side yard. And it's explicitly prohibited in the front yard. For the size of ADU, you'd be allowed to have up to an 800 square foot dwelling unit for those smaller lots that are under 6,000 square feet in total. For lots that are bigger than that, you'd be allowed to have an ADU that's up to 1,000 square feet. So I just want to recognize that in our first draft of the legislation, we proposed allowing ADUs up to 1,000 square feet in all zones on all properties. And this is one way that we responded to the feedback of the survey and some of the desires for the zoning to scale to some of our smaller properties. The height allowed for an accessory dwelling unit would be 24 feet. So that height would be measured to the midpoint between the roof and the eaves. And this was confirmed as an appropriate choice for our community in the ADU zoning survey. Another reason we picked this height is this would allow a lot of people to add a second story above their existing garage. The setbacks in the current legislation would be 5 feet from the rear and side property lines. So again, this was another way that we've responded to the feedback that we've heard so far and some of the desires for increased privacy. Originally, we had proposed a 3-foot setback because that's what a lot of our garages currently are allowed. So we recognize that an ADU has people in it. They should have perhaps a larger setback. So this setback also matches what's currently required for pool houses. This is a big one. So we're proposing that the property owner needs to live in the ADU or the primary dwelling. And then home-based businesses are conditionally permitted in the ADU like they are in any other accessory dwelling, in any other accessory structure. And I just want to point out that many cities, do not have an owner-occupant requirement. We don't feel that that's appropriate for our community at this time. This is one way where we want to be more conservative than some of the national trends. On parking, there'd be no separate parking required for the ADU, but you'd be allowed to have 200 square feet added to your garage area. So not many people know this, but we actually do have an upper limit on how big your garage can be in Cleveland Heights. So this would give you more area for your garage if you desire that for your ADU, but not require that parking. We recognize that, for some people, they might be an older adult, they don't have the same driving requirements. They might not need that garage. And then the ADU could be a reason to justify a reduction in enclosed parking requirements. So most single-family homes in Cleveland Heights are required to have 2 enclosed parking spots. We allow people to take down those garages if they're creating green space or as part of a home addition. An ADU would be another reason you could have relief from those requirements. So this would allow people to convert their garages. In summary, I just wanted to share, the screenshot was from our third-party review of the code. These are some best practices that they recommend. They come from the perspective of reducing barriers to ADU, to allow them to, as many to be built as possible. So, the best practice that they recommend, there's some ways that we differ. So they recommend 2 ADUs per lot. They recommend no owner occupancy requirement. And they also recommend allowing ADUs in all residential districts, which would include multifamily districts. So those are all ways that, we don't think that would be appropriate for our community, and we're being more conservative. We match the recommended coverage for lot coverage. We agree with them that we shouldn't require additional parking for the ADU. And this piece on respecting and legalizing the existing vernacular, this is really a big focus for us. What we're trying to do is legalize our existing carriage houses. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. We thought it might be time to take a little bit of a reality check. So as you heard, our city, as you saw on the map, if you remember those yellow and mustard areas, most of our city is zoned AA, A, or B. And so I know a lot of you are thinking, man, we can have a lot of ADUs. But there's a little bit of a reality check there, because when we account for the existing lot coverage, how much of the property already has structures or other things on it, that reduces the number of properties that potentially could have ADUs. So we think there's probably about 65 to 70% of those parcels that potentially could have ADUs. And while that's a lot of properties, there's also the reality that building a constructing an ADU is not inexpensive. We know that converting a garage will cost between $60,000 to $100,000, and so that's a significant investment that somebody would need to be wanting to make in order to create an ADU. And we've looked at other cities too that have enacted ADU regulations, and we found that there's not a dramatic rush to the building department to get an ADU in everyone's backyard. In Cincinnati, since they enacted their code in 2023, they have about 18 different ADUs in various stages of development. Lakewood only permits ADUs in their 2-family districts, and I think to date they don't have any that we're aware of. And so with that in mind, we've kind of talked about it, and we think that given the demand that we've been hearing from the public about people that are trying to find housing for either children or parents or caretakers, we think that even 5 ADUs a year will be a significant investment in Cleveland Heights, and we would love to see 5 families be able to remain in Cleveland Heights and maintain their family status the way they need to. So if we're able to do that, we think that ADUs would be a significant improvement and a quality addition to what we offer here.
Thanks, Karen. I'm going to talk about 2 of the major concerns that we heard in the community feedback, because we want to be transparent. So first, one major concern that we heard is that ADUs, will be loud and a nuisance, either as an Airbnb or as a hangout for teens. We feel that the current code addresses this as best as we can through the owner occupancy requirement. So again, requiring the property owner to live in either the ADU or the primary dwelling. If you're close to the problem, that makes it more likely that it can be addressed. It's also worth reminding everyone that existing nuisance codes around sound and behavior will also apply to ADUs. And it's worth mentioning that this process should be done concurrently with the short-term rental legislation. The other concern that we heard is that ADUs will have a negative neighborhood impact from increased density, either in terms of traffic or property values. We want to remind everybody that ADUs are a form of gentle density. What we mean by that is that the look of the neighborhood will still be maintained, because somebody living in a garage will go from a garage that used to house a car now has a person. So maybe the use is different, but the look stays consistent. We're not proposing replacing homes with 6-story apartments. It's still generally single-family properties. We want to remind everybody that, as Karen explained before, our expectation is less than 5 ADUs be constructed each year. So that means that a block that has 40 homes, that neighborhood change won't be overnight. And this is the big piece. If there's a dwelling unit, there could be another car. There could be one more car on the road, that slight increase in traffic. That is a true possible downside. But we feel generally that the community benefits from accessory dwelling units outweigh that slight negative from that car. And we've said here, one household staying in Cleveland Heights justifies the zoning change. That person who's lived in Cleveland Heights for 40 years and now has to leave, if that person can stay, people in Cleveland Heights are what make Cleveland Heights special, and we should try to retain them. I also wanted to remind everybody some of the existing inspections that we already have in place. So, there's an inspection process through building permits. ADUs will have to have permits. If there's rented, there's also going to be a rental inspection. When there's a change in the property, there'll also be a point of sale inspection. Those are all existing inspections that apply to ADUs. As mentioned before, the existing nuisance codes around behavior, sound will also apply to ADU. And reminding everybody that complaints about maintenance, construction without permits, or owner occupancy can all be submitted to the MAC in the future. I'm going to now pass it back to Karen, who will talk to us about the next steps.
Sorry, I thought you were done. He's not going to share his mic with me ever again. Next steps. So as you know, this is a zoning amendment. So for this to move forward, we go through the standard zoning amendment process. And that process starts with an introduction of amended ordinance to City Council. So this public hearing and education is something that's before we've even started looking officially at the zoning. Once City Council introduces legislation, they then refer to the Planning Commission for consideration and recommendation. And the Planning Commission then has 30 to 60 days to review that legislation. And they do this by holding a public hearing, a meeting, which is, of course, an opportunity for public comment. And then they will make a recommendation back to City Council. And so they often will make a recommendation either to approve something as it is written or make a recommendation to approve it and recommend some additional language or changes to the language, or they can recommend denial. When it gets back to City Council, then City Council will hold a public hearing, which is again an opportunity for the public to see the exact ordinance, the exact zoning code regulations, and to comment on that. And then City Council, when they're comfortable, then will come back and they can take action on that legislation. This is just the steps. Once this moves forward, we'll post this same information on our website, which I'm going to give you on the next slide, with the actual dates of when meetings are scheduled. But this is just to let you know what that process would be should this move forward. The next one. So we wanted to remind you, because we are excited to be here tonight, and as planners, we go to a lot of public meetings, and we're very used to this public meeting forum and understanding what comments can be. But we've learned that it's really helpful if you can be really specific about what you're feeling and why you're feeling that way. So while you might want to just say, oh, I just don't like this, that's fine, but it doesn't help us to understand how we maybe can make this better for you and for the community. So if you could say, oh, I'm concerned about how close the building is to me, or I'm concerned about noise, that gives us something to understand and then to address and see if there's some regulation that we should tweak or look at least. So we've started doing this with all of our public meetings, trying to help the public better inform us so that we can be better at our jobs and informing council about recommendations that we make. So if you could remember that tonight, that'd be great, but we're willing to hear anything you want to tell us. So in conclusion, we want to quote a resident that this came from, was it the survey? And so I think this is just a beautiful statement. And she says, first, thank you. My husband and I need a first floor master because of health reasons. We left our colonial in East Fairfax, where we lived for 44 years, for a lovely condo in the courtyards of Severance. We were lucky, but I would have added an ADU and stayed in place quite willingly. I miss my neighbors, as my neighbors were my family. So this is very real for a lot of families, and a real question that they're facing and need to face. So I hope you'll think about this sincerely and help us craft something that would be wonderful for the community. I'd like to, it's cut off a little bit, but this will be posted, this presentation, as well as other information on our webpage. So this information, if you can see it, it's at www.clevelandheights.gov and then /1707/accessory dwelling. If you go to the Cleveland Heights webpage and you can't find it, just do a query about accessory dwellings. Sorry, it got cut off there. And that is concluding our presentation.
Okay, thank you so much. And just to clarify for council, the draft that the council clerk had sent to us, is that with the June 2026 changes, the ordinance, or is that the last?
That's correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Just checking with my council colleagues, I would like to move to public comment, and then, because we'll have time to ask questions. Yeah, okay, all right, so let's start. I have, I'm not sure what the first name says, but in parentheses it says Drew Robertson on Newberry. Are you here? Okay.
Some more space.
Hopefully I don't need all that. Hi, good evening. My name is Drusilla Robertson. I live at 2516 Newbury Drive. I've been in this community for around 38 years. I'm very disappointed in the fact that we're even here discussing ADUs in this manner. Most of us moved to Cleveland Heights because of the park-like setting and that the yards were open. In my area, there are even no utility lines that go above our heads. I have a lot of concerns. I am a person that could possibly be interested in something like an ADU aging in place because I'm of that age. But the thought of people living in my serene backyard or the backyard next door to me, I don't like that. One way this is presented as aging in place, and then we read this draft that talks about parking recreational vehicles and passenger vehicles and all these other things that this ADU could be used for. So once that aging in place is over, and I'm not denying that I see the need for aging in place, but what happens to the people on the right and the left of that property when there are people behind them parking cars, doing this, doing that? Well, you say the owner is going to be living there and be responsible. Let's all be honest, we live here. Cleveland Heights is not currently upholding the ordinances that it has in place regarding to the state of the housing, the action of the housing. There's numerous homes in this area that have been taken over by investors from out of state. If you're on the West Coast and you tell someone you can get a home for $100,000, they'll tell you, I'll have 5. because that sounds very good. So we have to think of all of these things and not just stacking us on top of each other. This is a suburban area. If we wanted to be stacked, we'd be in an urban area. We'd be in apartments. We would not be living in single-family homes that have designated driveways and off-street parking. So I also think that 645 people in no way represents the amount of input that you should have before making a major change like this to our city. Thank you.
Cassie Pryor.
Hello, my name is Cassie, and this is my husband, Rob. We live on Edge Hill. I just want to offer my perspective in favor of ADUs. We currently own and operate several midterm rental properties in Cleveland Heights. If you're not familiar with the midterm space, these are fully furnished rental units, and they offer temporary stays for people who are here for longer periods, usually 30+ days. In the past 4 years, we have hosted a family awaiting the arrival of their baby via surrogate. We have hosted a family from Qatar on a prolonged stay after a heart surgery. We have a couple that comes to stay every year. They moved to Texas, but they love Cleveland Heights so much that they want to spend the summers here. They invited us for dinner at the end of one of their stays and said, "Thank you so much for doing what you do so that we can do what we do." We have learned that temporary stays are not just providing a place for people to stay, they're allowing visitors to experience our city. We don't just hand them keys. We give them recommendations to restaurants, shopping, parks, festivals, and many of them fall in love with our city and choose to stay. I think ADUs are an opportunity for other people to experience this, and on top of that, turn your home into a cash flowing asset. I would absolutely turn my 2-car garage into an ADU, host people from other cities, and enjoy the financial benefit and the relationships that we have been able to build in this business. That's our perspective. Do you have anything to add?
I would just add that also in doing what we do, we've even had people come and visit and then they do buy a house in Cleveland Heights. And I think that's part of community building, right? And so if people have a place to host someone, and like you said, they experience the city, they're likely to fall in love, just like everybody here has fallen in love with the city and choose to stay. I think that's a bit for me.
Thank you so much. Chuck Miller.
My name's Chuck Miller. I'm an architect. Most of the people in this room probably know me from other things I've been doing in the city. I've lived here for 42 years. My job is often to find design solutions for people, accommodating changes in their life. They want to stay in their homes and their neighborhoods, and very frequently that design solution is a primary bedroom and bathroom on the first floor to make aging in place easier for an owner. Sometimes a single family home needs to become multi-generational, and sometimes a room has to be added as a home office or a workshop. Today's lifestyles can make our huge inventory of homes built before 1930, homes that seem to be obsolete for many modern homeowners. So investments are made to adapt these homes with remodeling and additions. Now we can offer detached accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, as another option on the same single-family and two-family home properties with owner occupants. This immediately provides a way for aging parents to stay in their property in a smaller, more age-friendly home by using the equity they have built in their primary home, rather than being forced to move to an assisted care facility. away from friends and family and losing that long-term economic security. It allows younger family members to move into the primary residence, and everyone can enjoy the financial benefits of the shared property. I support the ADU ordinance with one strong objection. Section C, citing design standards, should be, in my opinion, removed completely. Among other things, it requires ADU designs to be compatible with the primary residence regarding windows and roof pitch specifically. Does compatible mean matching? It's a vague term. Design should never be dictated by ordinances. Design is to be considered on a case-by-case and site-by-site basis. Allow the ABR to work with homeowners and architects for design approval. It doesn't belong in the ordinance. If an owner wants a low-slope roof, larger fixed windows, or different siding material, would it require a variance by the BZA? I don't think so. We need ADUs in Cleveland Heights, and I want to urge you to move ahead with this with a qualified approval. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeffrey Talbert.
Good evening, and thank you again for having the hearing in the first place. It's much appreciated. I would echo the sentiments of the first speaker. My wife and I moved here 6 years ago from Park Slope, Brooklyn, which is a relatively dense sort of place. And the big appeal, and I was a student here at Case decades ago, was precisely the lack of density. And I have seen densification efforts, and ADUs in particular, in Port Townsend, Washington, where our son just bought a home and is indeed installing an ADU to help with affordability. I get it. Over the last 7 years, what we've seen in Port Townsend, in particular with respect to parking issues, is that as people have added more and more residents to what are essentially 1,500 square foot bungalows, relatively cheap by jowl, quarter-acre lots, you almost can't park. In fact, you not only can't park, you're on the grass. So there are several things I would recommend strongly. One is, I think the idea of waiving a parking requirement for any additional ADU is, let's just say, imprudent, to be polite. It's not going to work. You're going to have to be able to provide on-site parking without getting into the whole issue of alternate site parking on snow days. The mayor's done a brilliant job in his first winter here getting the streets plowed, so thank you. But it's not going to get any easier if you start having cars parking on the streets when there's snow. The second issue that I think is of both concern and can be resolved more easily is this issue of short-term rentals. The fact that the owner is on site is great, it's wonderful, but as other speakers have pointed out, we can't count on the owner either being there or necessarily enforcing noise limits on whatever. I've lived in neighborhoods where you see the wheelie backs coming up and down the sidewalk every day. The owner's presence doesn't help. On the other hand, if we moved from, let's say, 7 days to 30 days, if you want to have a caretaker on site to help as you age, et cetera, have a relative come live with you, could be 30, 60, 90, could be any number, but you're sort of out of Airbnb territory and into something that represents a more permanent domicile for whomever might be coexisting with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Scott Harrison.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Scott Harrison. Thank you for having this session and allowing us all to speak. I want to speak in favor of the proposal. I think it's wonderful. I think it should be awesome dwelling units, or maybe amazing dwelling units. But I think this is a terrific idea for Cleveland Heights. I think it is in the character of our city. We're transitional. We are partially suburbs. We're also an inner ring suburb that connects to Cleveland, and a wonderful district like University Circle that's doing its own master plan right now and thinking about its future. And so I think this is very much in fitting with the character and the purpose and the nature of who we are and what we can be. I think I love all the ideas and all the feedback and the smart ways that we're approaching this. I recognize, I think we all know that there are issues with code enforcement and nuisance properties in Cleveland Heights. There are in every city to a degree, but I don't think the answer is to table a smart move towards the future. I think like one of the earlier slides said about sort of concurrent legislation, so there's concurrent legislation on short term, there needs to be concurrent efforts to continue to improve code enforcement and nuisance property addressing and all those sort of things. I think that's the, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, so to speak. I just see this offering so many benefits. I'm in the Cedar Fairmount area, and I think there are many properties there that could very thoughtfully support. I don't know some of the other neighborhoods as well, but I think I mentioned being I've been here 5 years. I hope to be here many, many, many more years, and this is just a move I would love to see in the city that's going to continue to be my home as we just sort of think about the future and all the ways that we can serve and be a vibrant, exciting, walkable, thoughtful community. So thank you for having this time, and again, I'm in favor of the proposal.
Thank you. Michael Bending.
Hi, Michael Bending, Edge Hill Road. I had a quick question about the owner occupancy requirement. Say I have a house, I don't, but say I did, and I put an ADU on my property. I'm living there for a while. Someday comes, I want to sell the property. I guess I'm sort of curious what happens in that situation. I mean, would I have to sell it to another owner occupier? Would I be prohibited from selling it to someone who's not planning on living on the property? I guess I'm just sort of curious. But in general, I would say that I'm very in favor of this. I think that it's a great way for us to live part of the values of Cleveland Heights, which is, all are welcome, by making it easier for different types of people, in different types of situations to move into and or stay in our community.
Thank you. Susan Eisler. Well, at the end. Yeah. Susan Eisler, she. Oh.
Good evening. I live on Coleridge Road, and one thing that has not been mentioned are taxes. Will these ADUs be taxed as separate dwellings? How will the property be divided to cover those taxes? That's one of my questions. The other is safety and fire. Suppose you have an ADU in the back, you have 3 cars parked in a driveway, and you have a fire. How will the safety or fire department get back there? Nobody's looked at these. Nobody has addressed these. I haven't seen this, either the taxes or fire and safety addressed anywhere. And if you can put 1,000 square foot ADU on a property that is just 6,000 square feet or over, do you have any green space left? Cleveland Heights used to be the city of trees. We promoted green space, we promoted gardens, we promoted all of this. That one photo that they showed, they had an ADU in the back. It was all pavement. The driveway was a double driveway. There was a little bit of greenery around the edges. What are we going to do with that? I mean, there's just so many questions that have not been addressed, that have not been asked, that I think it's a terrible idea. And our history of enforcement is so poor. I came up Goodnor, and just driving, I could see roofs caving, I could see stairs falling, I could see stairs without railings. Our streets are, even with the patching that they've been doing, this winter that patching's all going to come up. Until we can handle ourselves as a city that promotes safety, promotes livability, putting more structures in people's backyards is just an awful idea. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll have planning staff answer those questions. This is our last speaker, Cynthia Trotta.
Hi, everyone. Cynthia Trotta. My husband and I have lived on South Overlook since the year 2000, and we are both in favor of this legislation. I've I've always lived with other family members. I've only spent about 2 years of my life in a single family home. I grew up in a double in South Collinwood. My relatives have lived in doubles. If any of you have watched the Miracle documentary, you'll know Michael Ruzioni lived in a triple with 20 other relatives. So to me, this is so normal and so supportive. When you think of the entire life cycle of somebody, ADUs support you every step of the way. If you are a first-time home buyer and can't afford that 4-bedroom colonial, you can live in the ADU, rent out the main house. As your family grows, you move into the main house, and maybe you get support in the ADU from a family member helping you with expensive childcare, from a caregiver that lives there. Continue down that life cycle, and it's time for you to move back into the ADU. Maybe in between, that ADU is a rental because it helps provide a child's education. Along the way, every step of the way, that ADU supports you. And that's on a personal level. What happens at a more broad community level? That means those bookstores we love to keep in town have more customers. That means those restaurants have more customers. That means our parks have more users. Why not? I mean, this is what our community was designed for. I'd like to support some of the comments people made. For example, all are welcome, and multi-generational families should also be welcome. Drusella, I concur completely, and among the other speakers who have said, housing does need to do a better job enforcing. I mean, if you look at all the MAC tickets I've submitted, you'll know that I believe that. And I would love to see that look better. I want to talk about parking briefly. So we live in a side-by-side double. South Overlook, for those of you who don't know this, is half single-family homes, half side-by-side doubles. Ours is smack dab in the middle. Our last 3 tenants had the following cars: 2 people, 1 car. 2 people, no car, still don't have a car because they bought a house down the street and I happen to know that. The ones before that, 2 people, 1 car. So these concerns about parking may not be as big a concern as we might think. And again, Susan, your comment about enforcement, I agree with you. I think we do need that to go along with this. Other than that, I approve and really hope that we move forward on this legislation, maybe not as quickly as South Euclid, but maybe a little faster than that timeline you provided. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So why don't we have staff right now answer the few questions that came up from public comment, and then we'll come back to council for our questions.
So I may miss many of the comments here, but one of the ones that I know that I think we should address is Chuck's comment about the design guidelines and sort of removing that from the code itself. And I think we should double check this as we go forward. But that was included in there as a guideline. So underline that part of it, meaning is that that's something that we're saying the architect and developer should be striving towards, but you wouldn't need a variance if you don't meet that standard. It doesn't eliminate the rest of your comment, but I just wanted to clarify that a variance wouldn't be necessary for that aspect of it. I forget the gentleman's name who has a person in Port Townsend, Washington. The idea of short-term rentals and the 7 days to 30 days. I know that's something that we're looking at in the other legislation, but I think it's a good point to consider because it sort of gets to that midterm rental distinction, which is something that we probably need to revisit. Let's see here. Michael Benning spoke about the owner occupancy requirement and what happens with the sale of that. Do you want to speak to that one, Xavier?
Yeah, so if the owner occupant requirement would be in place when the person constructs the ADU, it would be in place when they sell the ADU. So if they're renting the other unit, and they're selling the property, that next tenant, the person who's going to buy the property, they would need to live on site. So, that might mean ending somebody's lease early. So it would apply both before and after the sale.
And Susan had a bunch of questions about taxes and subdivision, fire safety, green space, and then the enforcement in streets. So on the taxes part of it, while we're not the taxing jurisdiction and the assessment comes from the county, it's our understanding that this is a significant type of improvement that would be factored into the property value, which then would be taxed at a higher rate. So that's the intention. But there is an increase. In the research we found, there is an increase in property values on the properties themselves. How they would be subdivided, I don't think that, from a zoning point of view, it would be one property. And in terms of how that's treated by the county and taxes, I'm not sure. But presumably, they're also considering that one property itself. Fire safety. We have had some conversations, and we have the building commissioner here tonight. Where Eric, there's Eric over there, other Eric. So I don't know if you want to speak a little bit about how, I know you're not the fire chief or the fire inspector, but how these would be reviewed by your office.
Good evening. Good evening, everyone. As far as the fire safety, the fire trucks have to access to the street, and after that, they will use the hose and everything else. Jim Straub is not here tonight, our fire inspector, but he can answer to all your other questions you have.
And I will add, we're going to put together a little bit of a Q&A or an FAQ that captures these questions. So we'll get that final answer from the inspector. And in terms of the green space, Xavier, you want to talk a little bit about how the open space, or really the coverage, is being treated in this?
Yeah, thank you, Eric. So in an effort to simplify the presentation, I mentioned that those smaller lots would be allowed to have up to an 800 square foot ADU, but there would still be a coverage requirement. So that means that only 60% of the lot can be covered by the building footprint, the driveway, and the ADU itself. So that still preserves 40% of the lot as green space. Thanks.
So that's what I had in my notes. I don't know if anybody else had any other.
That's what I had in mind as well. Did you want to address the comment about the parking requirements anymore?
Yeah, parking requirements, I mean, we know that this is one of the more contentious parts of all zoning, so I think it's something we want to take another look at. If you remember that slide that we put up that had the 13 best practices, not having additional parking was one of those, but I think that's something that we can take another look at and just compare what some of the recent examples of adopted Ohio codes did related to that.
Keeping in mind that those are best practices with respect to, we don't use more EVs. Best practices with respect to the entire.
Yep.
Okay. I'm going to move to council questions. And we did some questions at the last Planning and Development Committee meeting, but we have an updated version and also heard from the public. Anybody with some questions? Councilman Zawifoy?
Thanks so much. This is really helpful, and thanks for everyone for coming and speaking or asking questions. I have two quick questions. So these would only be allowed in A, B, and 2A zones, but is there, I believe I saw another requirement for in those zones when the primary structure is a single family home. Is that correct? Or is it any building within those zones?
So you're right, those are the zones where an ADU would be allowed. There's an additional requirement that it's only eligible for properties that have a single family or two family home on the property, because some of our schools are zoned a single family. We have some non-conforming fourplexes in some of our different districts, even some apartment buildings in our B2 family districts. So that requirement is to make sure that if a building just happens to be in the A district, but it's an apartment building, they wouldn't be allowed to then have another ADU.
So just single and two family?
Correct.
Within those zones?
Correct.
And then want to clarify 5-foot setbacks for all ADUs. Currently, the setbacks for residential property is 3 feet.
That for primary dwellings in the A single family district, they're required to have a side yard setback of 5 feet.
5 feet. So then this would be consistent with our existing
correct
setbacks. Okay.
And then for in the AA district, it's a 10-foot setback.
Okay.
So it's consistent with the current setbacks for pool houses, which is also 5 feet.
All right. Thank you.
Councilman Pat.
I'm a little bit concerned about the number of these ADUs that are getting built in the state of Ohio, and kind of curious why. I mean, if Lakewood hasn't had one, although it sounds like their legislation is more limiting than ours, just on the surface. But Cincinnati is a pretty progressive area that needs housing. I'm super surprised that they don't have any. And I mean, what, in 2 years? And I'm kind of curious also on how you came up with, well, we might have 5 a year. And so I know that, many community members are concerned about it. And they love it too, but for 5 units, it seems like we're going through a lot of gyrations just to accommodate 5. Or do we think that this is something that can really take off and blossom in this city and really get us some density to get people into our businesses, get our tax revenues up, and be a little bit like we were when we were thriving with a larger population, try to get back up to 50,000 population level. I guess I'm kind of rambling right now, and I really don't mean to be, and I'm not necessarily looking for answers right now, but it would be helpful if maybe at some point we could have a conversation about that.
I think those are all good points, and it's part of some of the research and conversations we've had with Cincinnati. There are some specific reasons why it may not have taken off there. There are some changes in the financial markets and world that are really showing that this is going to be able to take off. So I think it's a little bit of both, to the councilman's point, that there's some real reasons why it hasn't been successful to date, and why we're keeping that conservative number of 5 per year as a way to show slow growth. But we do think it's I would say every week we get a inquiry about somebody building an ADU. It's more than almost anything else in this city. Obviously, somebody wanting to change their windows out or do that type of improvement to their house. But beyond that, this is one of the biggest inquiries that we get. And we tell them it's currently not permitted. So that's the end of the conversation. But I think it's a conversation that we can continue to have.
Director, are you saying that, because so many people are calling, you think that we're losing potential population because we don't have this?
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful to know.
Council President Kuda.
Thank you. And thank you, audience. Great mix of comments to help us think this through. I just want to say up front that I always approach this from just, is this good policy? Of course, there are good individual reasons for wanting this, but we have to look at this as, is this good for the city long term, and what are the unintended consequences and so forth. So I'm asking my questions, kind of as a blank slate in a sense. First of all, I know we're doing, going back to zoning and Joe's comments, we're doing a zoning overhaul. I'm asking this as a question, should we not be doing that first and then, looking at ADU zoning to see how that fits in with an overall change, or or is it not necessary to look at it that way?
You're asking the right question, but we did at a previous council or committee of the whole committee meeting, ask this very question to the council, since this had a long lead time. And really every study that we're doing, our housing needs assessment, our zoning study, are all identifying ADUs as one of the tools in the toolbox. There was a indication at the time from council that we could move forward with this as its own legislation, but should that not be the desire, it would just get wrapped into that zoning study itself.
I'll just add, I think a benefit of doing this separately is that the zoning code update will be a lot of changes, and we don't want anything to get lost. So that was part of our conversation, was that this is something that can be.
No, I understand the separate part. I'm just talking about chicken and egg kind of thing. All right, and then Councilman Posh mentioned, the 5, and do you see this as something that would blossom? This seems to be something that we wouldn't want to blossom too much. I mean, I just don't see how, if everybody did it, like if there was a short-term rental next to everybody's house, that kind of thing. So is there going to be any regulation to how much this could happen if it were to catch on?
That's not currently being contemplated. I think we were trying by giving you the number of 5 to sort of have our cake and eat it too, show that there was a demand, but that it would not be this overwhelming demand that would change a neighborhood, a block overnight. It's all speculative. It's based upon the conversations and research that we're having. So I think it's something that there is a demand for and a need for, but will it become just overwhelming? No, there's a lot of reasons why that won't happen.
Unlikely.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'll just ask one more, and then I might have something later. I can't cite this California study, but over 90% of the ADUs in California have turned into short-term rentals. That concerns me. And I will get you the citation. I just didn't write it down. I wrote down the notes about the data, but not the source of it, which I can easily get you. I think Michael Bending brought this up, the transfer of the property and how, would it make that property less marketable only to people who are in that situation and so forth. And then if it's not people in that situation, it's people looking for a way to supplement their mortgage payments and so forth. And then, is that something we want? That kind of thing. So have you looked at those kind of trends? ADUs built for elderly parents going to, flipping to new owners that don't use it as an ADU the way, we're talking about.
Yeah, it's not something we've looked at extensively. I think it's one of the good follow-ups from tonight. It's sort of that next step after initial implementation, construction, first generation, then what happens. So I think it's a really good thing to explore further and, update in the FAQ and next time we talk about this. Yeah.
Without knowing that study, it's worth reminding. So California statewide, they don't allow owner-occupant requirements. So it seems like once that went into effect, that really led to the growth of ADUs there. So that answering some of the other comments about how we got to that 5 is keeping in mind that owner occupancy requirement, which is, could be related in that study without knowing the details.
Understood. Thank you for that.
Councilwoman Stone.
I just have a practical question and then a comment. So I'm looking at the draft legislation, and I may be missing this, but is there an occupancy limit? I didn't see it in legislation for ADUs, given the fact that the size, the square footage is stated?
There's no occupancy limit in the zoning code, but the building code would dictate.
It would, okay. It feels to me like, the most persuasive argument for this is the aging in place argument, and yet the legislation kind of wants to have its cake and eat it too. The idea that a business can be run, an unspecified business can be run out of the backyard of somebody's house without any limitation about parking or personnel traffic, I would question that. I think it's a way to limit the objections to that might occur in the neighborhood. And I think you have heard in both your comments to your study and in tonight that the interaction between the short-term rental legislation that is developing in this it's a big question, whether that would be a limitation, even if it was a plausible limitation given the other kinds of short-term rentals that are available in the city, as a way of keeping the eye on the ball that this is really meant to be an additional occupancy of the family that lives there and nothing else. And that is, I think, worthy of consideration.
Councilman Cobb, any? No. Go ahead.
Do we have an idea of the time frame that staff is? I kind of assume that this is still in the staff hands, and you guys are noodling on it and getting this feedback, and then you're going to be coming back with a much tighter staff recommendation for council to review.
Yes.
Do you have timing on that?
We'll need to talk about this with the mayor, but one of the things we were thinking about is trying to introduce the legislation for first reading prior to your recess to allow its referral to the Planning Commission while you're on recess. And then that would allow there to be some time for people to review it, come back in the fall or late summer or fall and have however many public hearings, public meetings you want on this, but start to get the ball rolling. And utilize the time that we have this summer as effective as possible.
I want to go back to the parking. I heard Cynthia Trotta say that, there's on her street, there's people moving in and one car, no car. I'm just going over my street in my mind. There's not one house that I can think of that has one car, not one. And as a matter of fact, there's very few houses that only have two. So I was wondering if we could maybe just reconsider that no requirement for parking aspect. That's the thing. I just don't see that.
Any other council questions? Okay, I just wanted to make a comment is that I'm really excited about the opportunity about ADUs. I've heard about it from my mother a lot. I've already told her I'm not building one for her, so I don't have a personal interest. I'm just not happening, but she loves them. But I do want to say, as someone who's lived in Cleveland Heights on a 7,500 square foot lot, and now I live on close to 10,000 square foot lot, I can't really imagine even a garage ADU on my old house's lot because of just how dense those single family lots are already. So I guess what I would like staff to, and on the other hand, so I was thinking about this as an opportunity on larger lots, but I also, in real candor, feel like that's perhaps an equity issue also, and that why would we limit it to those who have larger lots, which is what we did on the Planning Commission around garage reduction and parking reduction and things like that. So I guess I would just want us to think about how we can, I can imagine the density created on a 6,000 square foot lot and 7,500. So I'm not sure 6,000 is the right cutoff. And I'm not sure that 800, that's still a concern for me is how that actually plays out in practice. And I think it's fair to say that affordability of building an ADU also plays into it, right? If you have a house that's valued at $200,000, are you going to build a $150,000 ADU in your backyard? I don't know, but it's just something that I think we should continue to talk about because it makes sense on much larger lots, and I think the impact on neighbors will be much more acute on the smaller lots, which frankly, majority of our lots are non-conforming. So, okay, that was my comment. Yep, one last word.
We've all been throwing stuff at you, and I really want to make sure that you understand that we're very, very thankful. I mean, we all can't speak for each other, but the amount of work that you guys have put into this and the presentation and the level of transparency and the one particular slide where there's multiple times where the public can't speak to this is wonderful. And I think you already thank the audience, but I'm very happy that we have such a great turnout tonight and so many constructive comments. Sometimes you don't agree, sometimes you agree, but if you're constructive, that is the kind of feedback I think that we need as a city. So thank you.
Yeah. This was great. I will say that I have been hearing about this since October 2024 when you presented to the Planning Commission. So this has been, it feels like a very long time for me, but it's new for us, relatively newer as a council. But thank you everybody for coming. We'll all, most of us will be staying here a little bit if there are other questions or comments. And thank you to the planning staff as always. This meeting is adjourned.